posto. So I'll introduce. I'll start. Okay. Okay. Let me find my areas. Where did it go? Okay, ready? Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. I'm Marin, moderator. I'm the content director and consultant at Extensional, which is affiliated with Exence. We're basically the extension of Exence. So if you like the workshops and you like what you see here, then come over to extensional.com and you can read articles that are kind of continue the spirit of the workshops online. And today, in this session, I'm joined by Alessia Ceriani with Circana. So we're going to talk numbers and see what's happened in fragrance and a focus on niche. So we'll look at some trends, we'll look at things that are happening, and make some observations. And at the end, we'll see if we have a little bit of time for questions. Okay? Great. So Alessia, we'll start.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we will explore the world of fragrances in Europe 5, a world driven by emotion and creativity, and discover how niche perfumery transforms scent into art, emotion, and identity. So let's dive in. Looking at the European fragrances in 2025, you can see that the category continued to show resilience across Europe, reaching around 10 billion euro. Even in a complex economic environment, consumers continue to invest in scent because fragrances today play a much deeper emotional role of people's life. However, you can see that the growth is not homogeneous. Spain and Italy are clearly leading with strong growth, respectively by 8% and 7%, while you can see that markets like France are declining. This is quite interesting because considering its historical role in perfumery. So what's happening there? It's not about a sudden disruption, it's more like a combination of factors. For example, a very mature market, some retail challenges, a more cautious consumer context, but also an increasing competition from alternative channels. So it's a more structural normalization than a specific issue. If you look across the market, you can see on the right also the weight of fragrances within total beauty across the European country. And here you can see that it's not the same everywhere, because in countries like UK and Italy, the weight of fragrances is lower compared to the others.
Just before we move on, I just want to make one comment, and that's that I did go back to last year just to have an idea of what's happening. And so we see that in 2025, the top 5 EU was +2. But if we went back to the prior year, it was +8. So clearly, because I think we see a lot of information in the industry saying, oh, fragrance is growing, fragrance is growing. Yes, it is growing, but clearly the trend is also slowing. And this is something that we, as industry players, need to be cognizant of, and to look at these country performances and to think how can we build them, and also how can we grow the penetration, for example, in countries like the UK and here in Italy. Okay.
Yeah, in fact, what we see in the UK and the Italy market is not about lower consumer interest, but it's really about how these markets are structured. Because in UK, the beauty mix is more focused on skincare, combined with a very developed online and multi-channel environment, and this is reduce the weight of fragrances. While in Italy, the dynamic is a bit different, with stronger categories like makeup and skincare, but also a significant presence of mass and drug channels. So what we see is that the fragrances is not only driven by demand, but is also driven by category mix and channel structure. So we see a market of fragrances that is becoming more selective, more fragmented, and shaped by how consumers navigate across a category and offer. Because today is not just about what the consumer buy, but it's also about where they choose to buy. In fact, here you can see that this is where they buy is becoming more complex than ever, because consumers are no longer depending on a single channel, but they're moving across a different environment, depending on their expectation, needs, and occasion. So if you take a look at this slide, it's about where consumers buy fragrances product, and based on our consumer survey launched at the beginning of the year. You can see that physical beauty specialists remain the leading channel in Europe. However, online is gaining traction with consumer overlapping e-commerce of physical store, brand website, and specialist e-commerce. This is important because it's not a shift from offline to online, but we can say that is a multiplication of a touch point, and we realize that online now is play a very important role in the beauty ecosystem. And this becomes very clear when in the next slide we will see how e-commerce is evolving.
Just before we move on, when we say beauty specialist, this is like Sephora, Douglas, okay, yeah. Just so it's clear for everyone. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So now let's take a closer look at the real weight of e-commerce and how it's growing. You can see that prestige e-commerce in fragrances is growing faster than brick and mortar across Europe, and in 2025, e-commerce accounted for 29% of Europe prestige fragrances sales. What we see here is not a replacement of a physical retailer, but rather a rebalancing of role. Store become experiential space, while e-commerce become a discovery and convenience platform.
Yeah, and again, I went back to last year to see what was the percent last year. So it's 29 in 2025, and in 2024 it was 26%. So again, it shows that the online is growing, the penetration is growing.
And now we focus on the niche fragrances world. And you can see that e-commerce channel dynamics become even more interesting, because 1/3 of the sale come from e-commerce. You can see 36% versus an average of 29% before, while another third come from department store, but physical department store. And this balance is very interesting because it shows that the niche consumers are looking two things at the same time. On one side, experience and trust. On the other, discovery and access. Department store, physical department store, continue to play an important role because they offer physical immersion, premium services, human interaction. And for many consumers, especially in the niche perfumery, touching the bottle or testing the fragrances, but also hearing the story behind the creation remain very important. But e-commerce is becoming equally strategic. Why? Because niche fragrances consumers are highly engaged shoppers. They are curious, informed, and searching for something distinctive. New brand, exclusive launches, artistic collection, rare ingredient, and fragrances that feel differentiated and personal. And this is where e-commerce become very powerful. Online channel, in fact, remove the physical limitation of self-space and geography. And in many ways, e-commerce become the perfect environment for niche, not only a sales channel, but a discovery platform. And this brings us to the next question, which are the key reasons why consumers shop online? Based on the result of our consumer survey, of course, you can see that better price and convenience remain the key driver for shop online, especially if we consider also the socio-economic context that Europe are facing today. But not to forget the third reason, so the idea of a wider assortment that is becoming one of the strongest competitive advantage for online channel. And this is particularly important for younger consumers who are driven by curiosity and experimentation. Social media, in fact, also amplify this dynamic because today a fragrance can go viral globally within days on platforms, for example, like TikTok, create immediate demand, even if in market where the product is not physically available. So we can say that e-commerce become the bridge between digital desire and actual purchase. So we saw before that the price, promotion, and wider assortment remain the key reason for the consumer to shop online. But the way people discover and choose a beauty product is becoming much more complex. And this is what we explore in the result of our consumer survey. When we look at the purchase drive across a generation, we can see clearly that there are some similarity and some important differences. Across all age of group, fragrance remain very connected to trust. For that, samples are important for everyone because fragrances is still a category that the consumer want to experiment before purchasing. And also repeat purchase remain highly relevant, showing that loyalty continues to play a very important role in fragrances. But the real differences you can see that appear in younger consumers. For this target, in fact, influencers, social media, and digital play an important and stronger role than the older generation that are more focused in display in store and staff recommendation. So we can say that we are moving from a traditional retail-driven model to a much more community and content-driven model. And the last important thing that we want to highlight is the role of AI, because 23% of younger consumers say that they are influenced by AI when they purchase beauty products. And this could become very important and relevant for niche fragrances because AI could help them, especially consumers, to navigate in the market in a more efficient way. And for the niche brand, this can represent both an opportunity and a challenge. The opportunity is to create a deeper personalization, a stronger consumer engagement. But at the same time, niche must preserve what they make it special: human creativity, artistic vision, and authenticity.
Yeah, I mean, when we talked about this slide for a long time when we were putting the presentation together, and I think that it basically shows that the older consumer still is the one that is going into the stores. And that they enjoy having the interaction with the staff. They're swayed by displays. They're swayed by, probably by impulse. So having an attractive showcase or some kind of in-store event is pulling in the older consumer who's probably more used to going in the store since they grew up with that. Whereas the younger consumer is digital native, and so they're used to social media and influencers. And I think that, to me, it's very interesting that people use AI the way that they do, because, you know, call me a dinosaur, but I still Google things. And so I think I'm like the only person that's still doing this. But it's my go-to, which when you see that 18 to 34 is really going on ChatGPT or what have you, and they're saying, put my niche perfume list together, what fragrances should I go find? That's where they're doing it. So I think it's important to note, because then if you're a brand, you want to be sure that you're present. Okay.
Okay. So, but when consumers decide which fragrances to wear, the decision became much more personal and emotional. Here it's interesting to see that the first driver remained the performance, because 30... oh no, sorry. There is another slide.
Oh, there's something missing.
Yeah, they...
Oh.
Sorry. It's not the last version, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll go ahead with this one. So
yeah, because here you can see that the emotional dimension that is important in the fragrances market also help explain another main evolution in the fragrances category, because here, looking at the European 5 population, the idea of one signature scent still remain very strong for 30% of respondents. And this tells us something important, because for many consumers, fragrances is like an extension of identity, something people do not easily change. But when we move to younger generation, the story becomes very different. In fact, you can see here that the younger consumers are much more experimental in the way they use fragrances. They choose a scent depending on the moment, the occasion, the season, but also the mood they want to create. They may wear lighter fragrances during the day, a more intense scent for the evening or the social occasion. And you can see that there are also the generation that personalize more with the layering, the combination, and the fragrances routine. And for them, fragrances is not just one signature, but it became a true olfactive wardrobe. And this generational divide is important because the consumer over 35 years see fragrances as personal signature, while younger consumers see fragrances as an emotional accessory, adaptable for a different version of themselves. And this is what exactly where niche fragrances can become relevant, because they naturally respond to the desire of individuality, creativity, and emotional expression.
Yeah, I think it definitely speaks to the younger consumer having the desire to build a fragrance wardrobe. We're not even talking about size right now. We're talking about just the fact that they like to have a variety of fragrances for different reasons, for different occasions. And it's much more prevalent amongst that generation than amongst an older generation who still tends to be loyal to one scent.
And all of this change in consumer behavior are now reshaping the fragrances market itself. Consumers today are becoming much more intentional in the way they buy and use the fragrances, and this is what exactly why the market is becoming more and more polarized. What we see today in fragrances market is that the market evolving in two opposite direction. You can see desirability on one side and affordability on the other side. Let's start with the desirable side. Consumers today, you know, that are more informed than ever. There is a real education around fragrances, so people understanding ingredient, concentration, quality, and this is driven by premiumization. We see a strong shift versus high concentration, for example, the Parfum Intense Elixir, so richer and deeper, more long-lasting formula, where the experience became more immersive. And of course, this is exactly where niche and high-end collection come into play. But at the same time, we are operating in a more complex economic environment. Consumers are more cautious, purchasing power is under pressure, and value become more important. And here where affordability come in. So you can see that we see masstige brand that becoming more and more sophisticated, more credible, and closing the gap in terms of perception. Another segment that is becoming more important in all Europe is the Arabic fragrances, a growing market that offer a rich, opulent, but sometimes with a price very affordable. And then, of course, there is the phenomenon of dupe. But we see also the success of format like body spray, air mist, and mini size that are very perfect for the younger consumer and for a playful approach. I use, I change, and I experiment. And the most important things that is in fragrance, both segments are growing because they answer to different consumer needs.
The thing too here, I think, is when we think back to some of the slides we already saw about how a younger consumer is very influenced by social media and influencers, we know that over the past few years, there's more and more influencers that are talking about dupe perfume, Arab fragrance, and they are somewhat, they've legitimized using dupes. So it is part of the reason why we have this great divide between what is desirable and the niche price point, where I think then you're going to have a consumer who is being told it's okay, it's, you know, it's trendy, but also I think then you've got a question that could be in the consumer's mind of why is it the price it is? It needs to be justified, and so we have this cohabitation of two different sectors, that it's a split for the consumer.
Okay. So one thing, because it's not present in the update version, but what we see before for the market polarization, we also reflect in the consumer behavior, because you see the result of a dedicated survey that was launched in Italy by our partner YouGov, that they are asking consumer which type of fragrances purchase over the last year. And it emerged today that the consumer not belong to only one fragrance universe, but they move across designer fragrances, dupe, natural brand, and also, and obviously, niche fragrances. And so these live together reflect the polarization of the market. And one of the most important signals is that the awareness level of niche fragrances, because 62% of Italian consumers say they know niche fragrances, and so this shows that the niche culture is entering mainstream consumer conversation, especially among younger consumers.
Okay.
So, we enter in the world of the niche fragrances, and here you can see two most important things, that the niche fragrances are growing 3 times faster than the total fragrances, plus 6% versus 2%, and in 2025, niche fragrances reach a size of 800 million euro in Euro 5, and represent the 8% of the total prestige fragrances. but they have a much bigger impact than the market share and decay, because many of the behavior discussed before, such as personalization, fragrances wardrobe, layering, and emotional self-expression, fit with the philosophy of niche fragrances.
So, just on this one, again, I just wanted to see what's the trend. So as we see, it was +8. Niche was +8, whereas the prior year it was +15. So yes, it's still growing, but it's not growing at the same rate. So it's just a concern that I bring up because I'm like, I like double-digit increases. So we need to do a little more work to get there.
And niche fragrances we saw before that are growing across all European market, but you can see that the development is not equally distributed because some countries are more advanced in terms of penetration. In fact, you can see that is much more visible in the UK market, but there is an explanation because here, the niche fragrances accounting for 13%, but one important factor in UK is the strength of UK department store culture and the role that fragrances, the role in fragrances discovery, because most retailers have invested very heavily in the niche fragrances experience, creating highly curated environment dedicated to artistic perfumery. So these spaces are becoming destination for discovery, education, personalization, and luxury experience. And this stronger niche culture in market is also influencing the type of product consumers are buying in this category. And this is what we will see in the next slide. What we see clearly in this slide is that obviously juices remain the core of niche market because they represent the 86% of sales. But the most important things that we wanted to highlight is the evolution of the smaller segment like Gissette. And we here, when we talk of Gissette, we talk especially of discovery set. Even if they represent a smaller part because they account for 5% of the market, they are growing faster, especially in one channel, the online, where they also have the highest weight, 7% versus an average of 5%. So discovery sets are becoming extremely strategic because they make niche brand more accessible and easier to approach. And they reduce also the entry barrier while still preserving the premium dimension of the category of niche. And the consumer explore experiment within niche, we also see in the next slide a clear evolution of the brand. In fact, we see the top 10 niche brands account for more than 50% of the sale in both channels, brick and mortar and e-commerce. So, even if we know that the niche is a universe of discovery and creativity, it also became a more structured and brand-led market. So, consumers still look for uniqueness, but they depend on strong, recognizable brand to navigate in a complex and very large offer. All these brands that have success today are not brands that are selling fragrances, but they are able to build a strong community and emotional connection with the consumer. And this growing desirability is also reflected in terms of price.
One thing I wish that we could share is who is the top 10. And did it change between this year and last year? Because again, I went back and the top 10 in 2024 was 44% accounted for 44%. So it's grown the 6%, more or less. But who's in that top 10? And of course, to have that information, it's you've got to subscribe to Circana and they can share it with you. But just as an independent observer, I kind of am suspecting that, and this is a suspicion on my part, but I've just seen how much amouage has grown, for example, and we all have seen that it's a huge growth. And I would suspect that it's in the top 10 and that it's probably responsible for a fair amount of that. But it's a suspicion, so I can only say that.
And we talk about the price, and here you can see the comparison between the price of niche and the fragrances. You can see here that the niche today has double the average price. But even more important is that the niche price have continued to grow twice as fast as the rest of the fragrances category. And this tells us something important, because in niche, price is not only a financial element, but become a part of the perceived experience and desirability of the brand. But at the same time, we cannot ignore the broader economic context consumers are living today, and we also need to be very realistic. Yeah. In fact, European consumers are still highly value conscious. You can see here, based on our consumer survey, that 41% actively look for a cheaper alternative, 16% delay unnecessary purchase, and 10% look for promotion. But what is equally important is that 33% they say that they have not changed their purchase behavior. So it's true that the consumer may become more selective, but they are not always willing to give up fragrances purchase. And this balance between aspirational and affordability is also help us to explain another phenomenon across Europe. And here the phenomenon is the dupe phenomenon that are becoming very popular among younger consumers. You can see that 29% of European consumers say that they have already purchased fragrances in the last 6 months. But it's important to see that the 56% of younger consumers have purchased a dupe. So this reflects the growing also of influence of social media and viral trends. But this, at the same time, this trend also reinforces the value of authentic niche fragrances, because while dupe can imitate a scent profile, they cannot fully replicate the storytelling and the craftsmanship.
But you know what's really interesting here is that box where it says % satisfied with dupe purchase. And for the most part, it's more than half the consumers in each country. So again, this is, you know, like why? Why are they satisfied? And is it the price? Is it that they don't notice a difference? So this is something that I think, again, we need to be wary of this as people that are in the niche perfumery, artistic perfumery sector, that are we outpricing ourselves to the consumer? And why is it that the dupe is as satisfying to half the people? I mean, we haven't answered this question, but I think it's something that, I mean, if I were working for a brand, it's definitely something that I would have in mind, like, how can we differentiate ourselves and try to protect ourselves from being duped. Okay.
But we wanted to conclude with an important thing, because despite the growing search for affordability, one consumer target continues to stand out very clearly, and we talk about Gen Z, because it's a group that most willing to increase the spending on fragrances. You can see 25% say they intend to spend more in fragrances versus an average of 17%. And they are also the least likely group to reduce spending. So this is extremely important for the future of the niche fragrances and create a very strong opportunity for them. So We are at the end of our journey in the niche fragrances, and thank you very much for your attention.
We do have a few minutes. If anyone has a question, we can try to answer within the constraints of the information we can share. There's someone in the back.
Hi. I just want to know, what is a niche fragrance today? Because amouage is niche? That's the question. And more brands have been bought by big corporates. So are they still niche? So what's the niche? Because, yeah, maybe 60%, I don't know, the growth in the niche. But then, of course, if you have LVMH or others coming and buying you out, of course, you're going to be have a very good distribution. Can you still be in the niche category?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to look at what the criteria is of how you classify, say, premium as opposed to niche, as opposed to mass.
Yeah, we use a close list of brand, and we considering a price and also the distribution. So sure, a limited distribution and very high price compared to the mainstream fragrances of the market.
I mean, just to your question, I know it's a complicated question because, for example, this morning, Fragrances of the World made a presentation and they talked about niche as opposed to, say, masstige. And I really don't know that everybody uses the same definition. And so this further complicates our job. But a lot of it is based on old standards where niche was an alternative that was not part of a big group or it wasn't part of a big brand. But I think with Circana, they do have a specific list of brands that fall into each category. Other questions? No? Okay, well then we say thank you for coming and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.